Welcome to the latest episode of ATKPAS Procurement and Analytics Solutions, the Wave of the Future. Sharing knowledge is powerful. From Chicago, Illinois, I'm Stacy Rhodes, and I'm here today with my guest, Helen Clegg. Helen is the Knowledge Team Director in ATKPAS Procurement and Analytics Solutions Unit, where she develops knowledge-sharing solutions for procurement content, as well as being an active contributor to the global information and knowledge management community. Helen's background is in research and knowledge, where she has worked for a number of global management consultancies and Fortune 500 companies in their research and knowledge functions. Helen is a regular guest speaker at the London School of Business and Finance to undergraduate classes in marketing, as well as at the Grenoble Graduate School of Management in France, where she shares her insight and experience and knowledge management tools and techniques with MBA students. In this podcast today, Helen will be talking about the rise of knowledge enablement with insight on why knowledge is important, the failure of knowledge management, leveraging taxonomies, and why sharing knowledge isn't always about technology. With that being said, Helen, I'd like to welcome you to our podcast series today, and I'd like to start off by asking you about the importance of knowledge in today's economy.
Hi, Stacey. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite. So most organizations understand that knowledge is important. Witness the number of KM departments and jobs in companies today and the countless attempts companies are making to capture and transfer their knowledge. But I think the trouble is that most organizations don't really know how to go about enabling their employees to share their knowledge or insight effectively, let alone transfer it to another employee. And I'd like to share with you two examples of how difficult it is to share knowledge and the cost also involved. The first example is of a major aircraft manufacturer. Now, this company offered early retirement to thousands of employees during a business downturn, and then they got a rush of orders. And what happened was that the company then found itself very suddenly in this sticky situation because it was critically short of skilled production workers with the knowledge that they needed to do the job. And the production line therefore had to be shut down for more than 3 weeks. So that was really difficult for the organization to manage. The second example is a major US retailer, and this retailer reckoned that it took one of their marketing people about 5 to 6 years get to the top of their job and understand everything about customers and customer insights. So there's a big, an enormous amount of accumulation of knowledge there. And the retailer reckoned that if that particular knowledge isn't transferred, the company will lose millions of dollars when that person leaves to go to another job because of all the knowledge that that person has gained on the job. And that's an awful lot of money to see walk out of the door in an intangible way. So I think organizations need to be doing a better job at sharing and transferring knowledge. And as well as that, we also have a situation today where there's more and more information and insight being produced. There's an exponential growth in the amount of information available these days, and the information isn't just in document formats, but it's also in different types of format, audio and visual. Think about YouTube video clips, podcasts, social media comments and blogs. So a lot of different information and insight is being produced in many different formats.
So what I'm hearing is that knowledge management processes have really broken down in our current business environment. If that's correct, Helen, why do you think KM processes have failed?
Stacey, I think the concept of KM or knowledge management has failed for 3 main reasons. The first one is that I think it's been too technology centric. For me, KM got hijacked by software vendors in the mid-1990s. We saw lots of KM technology solutions, but they were never really very effective because they were really vast document management systems, and that's not the same as managing knowledge. Second, the function of KM is almost always seen as a back office function. So we have organizations saying that KM is critical to the business, yet on the other hand, the function sits in the back office rather than alongside R&D, marketing, finance, etc. KM has never really been properly integrated into the business. Knowledge processes need to be integrated into the business if sharing and transferring knowledge is important to the business. Otherwise, organizations are really just paying lip service to the concept of KM. And then thirdly, I think there's been an absence of clear communication and definition of what KM is about. It's been really difficult to communicate what KM is all about simply because there's never really been a common definition on the topic. I'm not convinced you can manage knowledge. For me, the two words don't fit comfortably together in my mind. I think you can manage data and I think you can manage information, but I don't believe you can manage knowledge. For me, knowledge is an intangible concept, and really, there's never been a clear definition of what KM is. Lots of organizations have different definitions, as do many different business thinkers who have written or spoken on the subject. So I think those are the three reasons why KM is really having a problem at this moment in time.
Helen, if we don't have KM or knowledge management, what are you proposing instead?
Stacey, what I'm proposing is that it's all about knowledge enablement. It's about enabling people to share knowledge through the right processes and tools. If we look at the evolution of KM, I believe it's time to talk about knowledge enablement. Let's look at the evolution timeline. The world before KM, that's about BC to AD 1995. People have been sharing knowledge for hundreds of years, well before the phrase KM appeared. Let's think about the Aboriginal people of Australia who use songs to pass on their knowledge. And then another example, the learned societies in England in the 17th and 18th centuries, which enabled men to gather together to exchange ideas, which led to invention. And then 1995 through 1998, for me, that was the emergence of KM. I think we really saw KM take off in the mid-1990s. It suddenly became a buzzword. And about this time, a book was published that many people refer to called The Knowledge Creating Company by Nonanka and Takeuchi. From 1998 through 2005, there was a growth and consolidation phase of knowledge management. This is when, for me, the whole concept of KM got hijacked by the software vendors. KM seemed to be all about document management systems and technology. And then 2005 through 2008, really this is about the struggle to define KM. From this point, I think there's been a real struggle. What is KM? What is knowledge management? There's been lots of debates by professional associations and other groups concerned with information structure and retrieval, and the debate is still going on. Knowledge enablement comes of age in about 2009. I mentioned the term at a conference in London in 2009, and it's a phrase that our team had been using for a few months because we'd reached the conclusion that knowledge simply couldn't be managed. So I'm going to be radical and state that in my view, knowledge management is dead. You can't manage knowledge, but what you can do is you can enable people to share what they know and enable their insight and experiences to be transferred by providing them with the right tools and processes.
Helen, you talk about having the right tools to enable people to share knowledge and insight. Would you share with our listeners a little more about the tools our organization is using?
Absolutely. So, Stacey, we have a number of different tools, but first I want to briefly try and define knowledge, at least from our unit's perspective. So, it comes in many different shapes and forms. It can be text, audio, video. It's relevant, it's actionable, it's dynamic, and it has context. Think of a recipe. You have the weights and the measures of the ingredients. That's data, that's raw data. Then you have the actual list of ingredients, and that's information. And then the really important bit is about combining the ingredients to form the finished product, and that's the knowledge. Knowledge is all about how to or know how, so the context is really important. With that said, within our unit, we've got this framework called the House of Knowledge, which includes our tools. Now, the house is a pyramid shape, and as you work your way up from the pyramid, from the bottom of the pyramid, the knowledge becomes more distilled. And what we're aiming for is that you can do more things with the distilled knowledge and exploit it in different ways. Starting at the bottom of the pyramid, we've got SharePoint process sites. These are essentially collaborative project management workspaces for the different teams and the different projects that they're working on. The next layer, going one above, we start to see the distillation process where we've got our podcasts and we've got our wiki. And these contain sanitized and distilled content from our project work. It's the know-how or how-to content with the context. At the top of the pyramid, we have got centers of excellence. Now, these centers essentially house content on specific procurement categories or procurement topics to help drive client value. Now, what's important is to make finding and sharing this distilled content easy for users. And the way we're doing this is through implementing a one place to search, one place to find platform. And then at the bottom, at the very foundation of our house, we have a number of layers that hold the house together, comprising governance, a taxonomy, syndication, and knowledge analytics. And for us, these are all elements of knowledge sharing that we think are extremely important and that drive the success of sharing insight and knowledge.
For our listeners that may not be familiar with taxonomies, would you share your thoughts on taxonomies?
Absolutely. So taxonomies are seeing a renaissance. They provide indexing, retrieval, and navigation support. So, for example, taxonomies make it much easier for users to find relevant content through better search functionality by allowing users to browse through the taxonomy to see what content is available on a particular topic, and by helping people to navigate around a website. For those who aren't familiar with the term taxonomy, think about a similar term which is a controlled vocabulary. So it's essentially a list of terms that the organization has chosen and that content is indexed or tagged against so that it can be much more easily found. So if you think about e-commerce sites, most of them use taxonomies and have taxonomists working full time to keep those taxonomies up to date. It's a behind the scenes type of work, but it makes a massive difference to findability and user experience. What we've learned is that taxonomies aren't easy to design and implement, and they need user input so that they reflect the search terms that users would likely use. So they're living, breathing tools, and they're never finished, but they're incredibly important and useful. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this has used Amazon.com, and if you look at Amazon.com, you'll see there when you have a list of drop-down search terms, and you can expand on those search terms. That's essentially a taxonomy in action. And I think taxonomies will become increasingly important as more and more information becomes available and people realize there are real limitations to free text searching.
Helen, in your presentations and speaking engagements, you talk about the fact that it's not always about technology. What do you mean when you make that statement?
Right. It isn't all about technology. I think we're living in a technological age and technology can do an awful lot of things. When it comes to knowledge, again, technology helps in sharing and transferring knowledge, but it can also be transferred and shared in many different ways. For example, not all workers in an organization have access to laptops or SharePoint or other collaboration tools. Storytelling, conversations, and oral transfer of knowledge works well in different situations. I mean, it served people for centuries and it's very effective. And that's one reason why we introduced our podcast series back in 2007. And I think it's about organizations finding the right tools and processes for them when it comes to wanting to transfer knowledge and get people to share their insight. Another example of transferring and sharing knowledge which doesn't involve technology is through the use of games. And here I'm not thinking about online games or gaming. At a recent conference I went to in Brazil, I heard about a company that needed to transfer knowledge to some of their semi-skilled workers out in the field. Now, the problem this company had was that the workers, they were semi-skilled, but they were also illiterate and they didn't have access to technology and it wouldn't have done them any good either. So the problem they encountered was how do you transfer the knowledge that they need to do their job in the field when you can't put that information on a SharePoint site or on a collaboration platform? So what they did is they actually invented some manual games for these workers to do so they could learn what they needed. And it worked really, really well. So there are other ways to share knowledge which aren't driven by technology. I think people have to understand the context and the culture they're working in. So for many people, technology will play a part, and it will play a big part in sharing knowledge and information. Witness the information that's available in social media posts these days. There's a lot of insight there that's going to have to be gleaned by text analytics and other applications. But for other organizations in other cultures and countries, it might well be that simpler ways of sharing and transferring are just as effective and efficient.
Helen, at this time, in summary, please share key points from your presentation today you would like our listeners to remember.
Stacey, to summarize, I think there are 4 key things. The first is that technology is only part of the solution. Think about the ways that you can share knowledge apart from using technology by storytelling, by conversations, oral transfer of knowledge, and also the example I gave of transferring knowledge by playing games. So technology only plays a part of the solution. And then knowledge comes in many different forms. It's not just about documents. Think about audio and visual, and then the social media as well. Thirdly, I believe there's a renaissance underway at the present time with regard to taxonomies or control vocabularies, which really help users find information much more quickly. So findability of information and content is enhanced by taxonomies. And then lastly, I think it's really about enabling people to share. It's about enablement, knowledge enablement, and that's really for me where we're going.
Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast on the rise of knowledge enablement. I'm Stacey Rhodes in Chicago, and I'd like to thank Helen Clegg in London for being my speaker today, and Tom Klein, our production engineer based in San Francisco. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Wave of the Future. Join us again soon for the next podcast, and if you have any comments regarding this podcast, please tweet them via Twitter, where our handle is @ATKPAS, and alternatively, you can email us at podcast@atkearney.com. This has been an A.T. Kearney Procurement and Analytics Solutions podcast production. Join us again next time for The Wave of the Future, and remember, sharing knowledge is powerful.